Hello everyone. In last session, we have seen how to install Git in our system, and we have also seen creation of GitHub account. So we have already understood in our previous session, Git is a local repository, whereas GitHub is a remote repository. So whenever individual who are working on the project, they will first write the code in their local system, that is the working copy which will be present in everyone's local system. From the working copy, they will commit the code into local repository, that is Git repository. And from Git repository, we can push the code to remote repository, that is GitHub repository. So for local repository, we have to install Git in our system. So in last session, we have already installed Git software in our system. In today's session, we will see how we can commit the code in local repository first, and then from local repository we will pushing our code to remote repository, that is GitHub repository. So first step is we have to commit the code in local repository. So if you see currently the project and the test cases which we have written, those are present in our local system. So this is our automation test cases project which we have created. And if you see, if I open in Explorer window, so this is the location where our project is present. So this is present in my local system. It is known as a working copy. And we want to commit this code in local Git repository. So first step is we have to create local repository. So first step is we have to create local repository using Git, and then we can commit our code into that local repository. So let's start with that. Before that, also understand that so far we are here. Our code is present in our local system. And from this working directory, we have to first add the files in staging area. Staging area is a memory location between our local repository, that is the Git repository which we will create. In between our code and local repository, there is staging area. So flow is like, first we have to add the files in staging area, and from staging area we can commit the files to local repository. So first let's create local repository for the project. So we can work on multiple projects. So for every project we have to create Git repository, that is Git local repository. So if you are working on 10 different projects, then you will have 10 local repositories present in your system. As per every project, there would be one local Git repository which we have to create. Now, how to create a Git local repository? So first step is we have to find out the project location. So if you see, this is the path of the project location, or you can simply right click on it. So we are in PyCharm currently. So from the PyCharm, you can select the project. You can select open in Explorer. So it will open the project in your system location. Just I am going inside this project. Now this is my project location. Now I am inside my project folder. Once you are inside the project folder, now we will be creating one local repository for this project. How to create the local repository now? So once you are inside this project location, right click here. After clicking on it, show more options. And if you see, after installation of Git, so once you install Git in your system, you will see two options here. First one is Git GUI here and Git bash here. So I am going to select Git bash here. So after installation of Git, you have to right click and select Git bash here. it will open one command prompt window. This is not a Windows command prompt, it is basically git shell command prompt. So we can execute all the different commands from this window. So whenever we want to commit the code in our local repository, or let's say we have to push the code to GitHub repository, all these things we can perform via different commands in this git shell command prompt. Now here we have to execute certain commands as we are going to create the first time local repository. So there are few commands which we have to execute only one time when you are creating the local repository and committing the code very first time. Since we are doing it very first time, we have to execute certain commands. So first command is we have to create one empty local repository. So we have to create one empty local repository. So if you see, so far we have downloaded and installed the Git. We have also created account on GitHub. Now next step is we have to go to project folder. So this is the project location. I have already reached to that project location. Then we are going to create one local Git repository for that project. We have right clicked git bash here. It will open git command prompt, and the first command which we have to execute is git init. So every git command starts with git keyword. And once you execute git init command, it will create empty local git repository. So I'm just opening it. So this is our project location. And inside this project location, this is the git command prompt window. And here we have to execute command like this, git init. So git init and then press enter. So if you see the message, initialized empty git repository in our project location. So this is our project location. Inside that empty git repository is initialized. If you see here, .git folder is created. That means for our project, we have successfully created empty git repository. So we have just created the empty git repository. We haven't yet committed the code into that repository. So after that, the next step is connecting our local repository to GitHub repository. So if you see, we have created a local repository, and we also have to connect that local repository to remote repository, that is GitHub repository. We haven't created any GitHub repository yet. So far we have just created a local repository for our project, and we have to create GitHub repository for our project as well, and then we have to connect both those repository. So I want to now create the GitHub repository for our project. So where we can create the GitHub repository? In last session we have created GitHub account. So we have to log into that GitHub account first. So you can visit github.com. Then you can click on sign in. You can enter your email ID and password for your GitHub account, and you can log into that GitHub account. Now I have already logged into my GitHub account. Now this is my GitHub account. Inside that we have to create one repository for our project. Now this time we are creating a remote repository for our project. So if you see the option here, new repository, you can simply click on new button. It will show you your username here. Inside the repository name, you can give the project repository name. So what I will do, I will keep the remote repository name. So here my project name is NOP Commerce. So I will just provide the same name. Let's say I am providing NOP Commerce. So this is available. So I am just creating the repository with the name as NOP Commerce. If you see, we have given the same. You can give any name, just make sure it is available. So after giving the repository name, you can select whether it should be a public repository or private repository. Now we are creating the GitHub repository. So private will be limited to yourself. Nobody can access the private repository unless you give the rights to those users. But public repository, anyone on the internet can see this repository. So even if I create one public repository and give the URL of this repository, anyone can access that repository and see the code. So I'm going to create the public repository, and then you can simply click on create repository. So it will create the empty GitHub repository for you. If you see, this is the repository which we have created, and if you see the URL, this is the repository URL as well. So currently there are no files in this repository. This is empty GitHub repository. So if you see, so far we have created a local GitHub repository which is empty. We have also created a remote GitHub repository, and both of these are currently empty because we haven't committed any code, and we haven't pushed any code to GitHub repository. That's why we have just created empty local repository as well as empty GitHub repository. So now what we will do, what is the next step? So after creating the GitHub remote repository, we have to get the URL for this repository. So if you go to settings, or you can simply go to repositories, so if you go to the home page, from home page you can see the repository which we have created. Inside the repositories, you can see this is the repository which we have created. I'm just going inside that repository, and inside this repository, if you see, this is the URL of your GitHub repository. So we need this URL. For the next step, we are going to connect our local repository to GitHub repository. So I'm just copying this. You can simply click on here. I'm just noting down this GitHub remote repository URL which we have created for our project. And then let's say I'm just pasting this project repository URL here. I'm just noting it down. This is our project URL. So let's say I'm just noting it down here. I'm creating one new slide. I'm just pasting the GitHub repository URL here. So far, we have created empty local repository, empty GitHub repository, and then the next step is we have to connect our local repository to remote repository. We have to connect local Git repository to remote GitHub repository. For that, we have to use following command: git remote add origin and the URL of our GitHub repository project. So we have to use this command. Which command we have to use? Git remote add origin and then URL of the GitHub repository. So I'm just going back to this window. So what is the? I'm just pasting it. So command is git remote add origin and then URL of GitHub repository which we have just created. And once you press the enter, it has connected our local repository with remote repository. So connection between local repository and remote repository is happened now. So we have connected our local repository to remote GitHub repository by using git remote add origin command. Now after that, the next step is we have to commit the code first time, and for that we have to execute certain commands. These are one-time commands since we are committing very first time in our local repository. So far what we have done, we have created one local Git repository, then we have created a remote GitHub repository, we have made the connection between these two, and now we are going to commit our code to local repository. Currently local repository is empty, but we are now going to commit our code into local repository. And before that we have to execute certain commands. Since we are doing it very first time, we have to execute following commands. Command is git config -- global user.name, then you have to provide username, git config -- global user.email, and then email id. So I will just type this command. First command is git config -- global user dot, you have to provide user dot name. In double quotes I am just giving the name, press enter, and then next command is git config -- global user dot email, and then you have to provide the email id. Press enter. Now first two commands, these are basically we have to execute only first time when we are committing the code, very first time for our project. Now we have to add all the files into staging area, that is the index area. So far now we have to add our working directory file. So before committing the code to local repository, there is one staging area in between your working directory code and local repository. There is one staging area. So first we have to add all the files into staging area, and from staging area we have to commit those files in local repository. So we have to add all the files in staging area first. It is between our project code location and git repository. And before that you can also check the status of files as well, whether they are added in staging area or not, whether they are committed or not. That status you can check by using git status command. So now if you put git status command, git status command, it will show you untracked files. If you see the information here, it is saying that no commits yet. That means we haven't committed any files yet. That's why they are called as a untracked files. It is showing all the files which are untracked files. We haven't any made commit yet, that's why they are untracked files. Nothing, we haven't done any commit yet. That's why it is showing in red as a untracked file. So if you see, this is our working directory. In that there are untracked files because we haven't added those files into staging area yet. Now we will execute the add command and we will add those files into staging area and they will become tracked files. And from there we can commit the file into local repository. So now if you see, this is showing status as untracked files. Now I want to add those files into staging area. So what is the command for that? To add all the files into staging area, we can use git add -a. This command will add all the files into staging area. So I will just add that command. Let's say git add -a. That will add all the files into staging area. So if you see, all the files are now added into staging area. All the files now added into staging area. So now again if I check the status, git status, it will show you all the files as a green. So previously it was showing red because they were not added into staging area. They were untracked files. Now after adding all the files by using git add -a, we have added those files into staging area. If you see the flow, previously we are at this stage. In working directory, all the files were untracked. Then we have added git add -a command and we have added those files into staging area. If you see, from working directory, we use git add and we have added file into staging area. After adding files to staging area, if you put git status command, it will show you all the files as green. And if you again check git status, it is showing all the files into green. So now files are added into staging area. Now what is the next step? From staging area, we have to commit those files into local repository. From staging area, we can commit those files into local repository. We can commit the code into from git staging area to git local repository. So for that, what is the command? Git commit -a -m, and then in double quotes we have to put some comment. So now what we are doing is, we are basically into staging area. So files so far in staging area, by using git commit, we can push them to local repository, and file will be committed to local repository here, and they will become track files. Already they are track files. Now we are committing to local repository, that is git repository, committed files. So what is the command for that? Git commit -m. So let's execute that command. I am just executing that command, git commit -m, and then in double quotes we have to provide some comment. So let's say I'm providing this is first commit, and then you can press the enter. So once you press the enter, all the files are getting committed, basically already committed now to local repository. If you see, all the files are now committed to our local repository. So if you now check the git status, it is showing we are on branch master and there is nothing to commit, working tree clean. That means all the files we have committed into local repository. So now if you see the graph, or if you see the diagrams of the flow, we have committed our local code into git repository, that is local repository. So we have successfully committed our code to local repository. Now what is the next step? From local repository, we have to push the code to GitHub repository, that is remote repository. If you see, we have added untracked files from working directory to staging area first by using add command. From staging area, we have committed the file to local repository, that is git repository. And the next step is we have to push the code to remote repository, that is GitHub repository. If you see, GitHub repository is still having no code because our code is present in our local repository. Now we are going to push the code into GitHub repository. After pushing that code, we can see the code in GitHub repository as well. So if you go to the, so we have committed this code successfully in our local repository. Now we are ready to send our code from Git local repository to GitHub remote repository. Now we can send our code from our local repository to GitHub remote repository. So for that, which command we have to execute? So first command is git push -u origin master. Now if we have to use command like this, we can clear this as well. So I'm just clearing it. So once you put the clear, it will clear all the commands. Now next command is git push -u origin master. So what this command will do? This command will push all the code present in our local repository. All the code will be pushed to remote repository. So I'm just pressing the enter now. So it will push all the code from our local repository to remote repository in our GitHub. So that is the command git push -u origin master. It should ask us for username and password. It is already pushed the code, so it has already pushed the code. But sometimes if you are using it for the first time, I have previously pushed the code, that's why it is not asking me for username and password. But if you are using it very first time, it might ask you for username and password. You can enter the username for your GitHub account. You can also enter the password, and then code will be pushed to remote repository. But in my case, it has already pushed the code to remote repository. Now if I go to my GitHub repository, which we have created, and refresh the page, all the code should be present here. If you see, now all the code is present here. This is the comment which we have added while commenting. 3 minutes ago we have committed the code in our local repository, and from there we have pushed the code to GitHub repository. So if you see, all the files, all the test cases, all the test data, all the utilities file. So basically everything which we had in our local project, we have successfully pushed all this project, all these folders, all these files, all this entire project we have successfully pushed to GitHub repository. So now anyone can see this code if you give this URL, the project URL. So if you, let me just show you. So this is our project URL of GitHub repository. So if I simply copy this and if I simply paste it here, anyone in the world can see my project now. It will show you my project, right? So this is the successful pushing the code to remote repository. We have successfully pushed our code from local repository to remote repository. So initially we have started here. We have first added our code from working directory to staging area by using git add command. From staging area, we have committed the code to local repository. So after local repository, we have now pushed the code to GitHub repository as well. In remote repository, we have pushed all the code. And in the next session, we will see how Jenkins can get this code from GitHub repository. So how Jenkins will get it? Basically, it will also use the same URL. By using this URL, Jenkins will fetch this code and we can execute the test cases in Jenkins. So let's revise one more time. We have successfully pushed the code into remote repository. Now this is the one directional flow we have seen. This is the one directional flow we have seen. If you see, we have pushed the code to GitHub repository. But let's say someone makes changes to GitHub repository files. There can be multiple people working on the same project. So tomorrow, if some member from the team changes any files in our GitHub repository code, and let's say I want to also make the changes in the same file locally, then how we can do that? So far we have seen the one directional flow, but we can also pull the code. So for example, let's create a new file. So what I will do, I will just create one dummy file here, add file. I'm just creating a new file in GitHub repository directly. So I'm in this project, I'm just creating, let's say, test file demo, and I'm just adding some content here. Let's say test1. I have just added one simple content and we have created new file in our GitHub repository directly. I'm just creating that file. So if you see in the GitHub repository, that test file demo is created. But in our local system now there is no that file because we haven't pulled that code yet. If you see in my local system, we cannot see that file. But let's say I want to make changes in that file. The file which we have added in our project in the remote repository, this file, I want this file in my local system. I want this file in my local system and I also want to make some changes in that file. So currently if you open this file, there is simple test1 comment. I want to change some code in that file. Let's say I want to make some changes in that file. So first we have to get that file in our local system. Currently it is present in remote repository. We want that file in our local system. So what we can do is, we have to pull the code. To pull the code from GitHub repository, for example, if someone has added new test cases or new code or new files in the GitHub repository, then and if you want to make the changes, we should get that code first. From remote repository, we should get that code first by using git pull command. So what I will do, I will simply use git pull command. I will simply use git pull command. So once you use the git pull command, that file will be pulled in our local project. Now if you see, that simply one file got added. So now if I go to PyCharm, if you see, previously that file was not present here. But now if you see, test file demo is successfully into my local system. So if I want to make the changes, I can simply open it. I am just opening this file. So there was test1 which was already added in it. I want to make some changes. So let's say I'm just making or adding some new part, test2 test3, right? And then I will just save this file. And now I want to again commit this file to local system. From local system again I have to push that file to remote repository. So now if you check the remote repository, currently that file is not having any changes because this is our local system. And now we have already made some changes in that file, and then we have to follow the same steps again. So what are the steps we have to follow? We have to first add the files in staging area, then we can use git commit, and then we can use git push. So let's add those commands. Git add -a, that will add that file in which we have made the changes, and then we have to commit that file. So git commit -m, again we have to provide some comment. Let's say this is my second commit, and then we have to push that file. So now we have successfully committed the file into local repository. Now we have to use git push -u origin master. It will successfully push that file into GitHub repository. So it will successfully push that file into remote repository, that is GitHub repository. Right? So now file is successfully pushed. So if I go to remote repository and if I open that file, let's go back and let's see that file. If you see the test demo file, let's refresh the page once more time. After refreshing, if you see test file demo, we have just now pushed it, that's why it is showing now. And if I open this file, you can see these comments which we have added, right? So this is how end-to-end flow will work. So in your day-to-day activity, what you will do, you will pull the code first. Every morning you can be working on the project, and every day there will be some changes happening in the project. So whenever you come to the office, you have to first pull the project, make your changes, whatever test cases you are adding, whatever new code you are adding, you can make the changes throughout the day. And at the end of the day, again you have to add those files and then commit those files into local repository and push those files to remote repository. So this will be day-to-day commands which we will be executing in real-time projects. So some of the commands which we have seen, for example, git config, etc., those commands we have to perform only one time. For example, connection of remote repository and local repository, first time configuration, these are one time activity. But in day-to-day activity, you will be using some of the commands very frequently. For example, git status to check the status of the files. Every time you have to add the file, then you can use git add command. For committing your local repository, you can use git commit command. Then for pushing that code into remote repository, we have to use git push -u origin master command. So these commands we will be using very frequently in our projects. In your day-to-day activity, we will be using these commands very frequently. So this is all about committing the code into local repository, and from local repository we have successfully sent our code to GitHub repository, that is remote repository. So if you see, we started from this point where we had the code only in our local system. We only had the copy of our project only in our local system earlier. So we have committed our code to Git, that is the local repository. And from Git, we have pushed our code to remote repository as well, that is GitHub repository. So now our code is present in global repository, that is GitHub repository. And from this GitHub repository, in the next session, we will see how we can execute the test cases via Jenkins. So now Jenkins can get that code from the GitHub repository. So thank you for watching this video.